How one text changed my life forever. A journey from embarrassment to love. I had always imagined myself as calm, collected, and graceful, especially on dates. But tonight, that image shattered, replaced by an embarrassing story I would tell for the rest of my life. The date had been wonderful. He was a friend I had known for 3 years. But tonight something was different. There was a spark, a realization that our friendship had been teetering on the edge of something more. We'd shared laughter, glimpses of vulnerability, and even a quiet, almost reverent moment when he kissed me goodnight. My heart was still pounding as I closed my apartment door, trying to absorb the depth of emotions swirling inside me. That's when I decided to text my best friend, the one person who would understand the giddy excitement that was bubbling up within me. I typed out the words, barely thinking, I think I'm going to end up marrying this guy. With a huge smile, I hit send, but the smile faded as I realized what I had done. In my blissful haze, I had sent the message to him, the same man who had just walked me home and kissed me. The man who had no idea I was already imagining a future with him. I sat frozen, staring at my phone, wishing I could will it back from the void. My heart was hammering, and a wave of horror washed over me. It felt like time had stopped, trapping me in that dreadful realization. How could I fix this? I considered 1,000 absurd options, throwing my phone out the window, leaving the city, maybe even moving to a new country. But none of that would erase the fact that I had just, effectively, proposed to a man after our first real date. Just as I was contemplating how much embarrassment a single human could bear before spontaneously combusting. My phone buzzed with his response. I couldn't bring myself to look, but curiosity won out, and I peeked at the screen. His reply was simple, humorous, and somehow exactly what I needed. I don't usually read messages not meant for me. He even added a laughing emoji, a small mercy that felt like a lifeline. I quickly typed out a flurry of apologies, feeling the heat of embarrassment all over again, but he only replied with reassurance. Then, almost casually, he mentioned that he was still looking forward to our plans to visit a museum that weekend. Despite my mortification, I felt a surprising sense of relief. The text might have been a slip-up, but in a strange way, it was honest. I had harbored feelings for him longer than I wanted to admit. And maybe, in that embarrassing moment, I had allowed myself to be vulnerable in a way I hadn't expected. As I lay in bed that night, reliving every second of our date, I realized that something in me had shifted. I couldn't hide behind jokes or feigned indifference. He knew now, even if unintentionally, just how much he meant to me. Over the next few weeks, our dynamic changed. He hadn't run away or laughed it off. Instead, he leaned into it, turning my accidental confession into an ongoing joke. Every so often, he'd refer to himself as the guy you might marry, and though I'd laugh, it was clear that he was genuinely touched. It was as if the slip had broken down a wall neither of us had acknowledged before. Our relationship blossomed in the following months. We went from casual outings to dates that lasted until midnight, conversations that dug deeper than surface-level banter, and moments of shared silence that felt full, not empty. I started to feel like he was more than just a romantic interest. He was becoming my confidant, my rock. But our story wasn't without its hurdles. With our history as friends, there were moments of hesitation. I wondered if taking things further would risk our friendship. If opening myself up to him in a romantic way might be too much too fast. There were nights when I lay awake, thinking about whether I had rushed into something, questioning if he saw me the same way I saw him. He, too, admitted to feeling nervous about moving forward. But every time a doubt surfaced, we found ourselves talking through it, laying it all out. The openness and honesty that we had forged in our friendship helped us navigate the uncertainties, transforming them into moments of mutual understanding. It was during one of these deep talks that he told me something I would never forget. We were sitting on a bench overlooking the city, and he turned to me with a soft smile. "That accidental text you sent? It might have been the best thing that ever happened to us," he said. I laughed, but his words lingered in my mind. As our relationship grew, we continued building our life together, one small moment at a time. We'd spend evenings cooking dinner together, talking about everything and nothing, or planning weekend trips to places we'd always wanted to visit. There was a simplicity to it, a quiet joy that felt real and grounding. Slowly, I started to let go of the fears I had held onto, fears of rejection, of vulnerability, of allowing myself to believe that I deserved happiness. A year after that fateful text, he proposed. It was a quiet moment, just the two of us, sitting in a park where we'd had our first kiss. He held my hands, looked into my eyes, and asked me to be his forever. There was no grand gesture, no elaborate planning, just a heartfelt, honest question that mirrored the simplicity and authenticity of our love. I said yes without hesitation, feeling the weight of all my fears melt away. Our journey didn't follow the script of a perfect love story. It was messy, filled with embarrassing moments and doubts. But it was ours. Through the ups and downs, we learned that love isn't about grand romantic gestures or picture-perfect moments. It's about vulnerability, honesty, and showing up for each other, even when it's uncomfortable. Reflecting on that accidental text, I realized that the things we fear most, our mistakes, our flaws, our unguarded moments, are often the things that bring us closer to others. If I hadn't sent that text, if I hadn't allowed myself to be seen in such a raw, unfiltered way, we might still be friends, dancing around feelings we were too afraid to admit. Looking back, I'm grateful for that moment of mortification. It taught me that sometimes the most embarrassing moments in life are the ones that lead us to our truest selves. I learned that love isn't about hiding behind a mask of perfection. It's about showing up as we are, embracing our flaws, and allowing someone else to see them too. Today, as I sit beside him, now my husband, I can't help but smile at the journey we've shared. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that's what makes it beautiful. In the end, I realized that love is rarely found in the moments we plan. It's discovered in the unexpected, the vulnerable, and sometimes, in the painfully embarrassing. And for that, I wouldn't change a thing. When blood turns bitter, a son's fight against deceit and betrayal. From a young age, family was the foundation of his world. Even after his parents' divorce, he grew up in the warmth of both parents' love. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was stable. Little did he know that his father's remarriage would trigger a web of manipulation that would change his life forever. Challenging everything he thought he knew about loyalty, trust, and family bonds. The catalyst came in the form of Gina, his father's new wife. At first, Gina seemed warm and welcoming, a doting stepmother, and even kind. However, beneath this facade lay a different agenda, one driven by self-interest and a desire to secure her own children's future at any cost. The narrator's initial acceptance of her quickly morphed into discomfort as Gina began to reveal her disdain for him subtly. Then more overtly, she whispered cruel things about him when they were alone, sowing seeds of doubt and insecurity in his young mind, all while maintaining her role as the doting stepmother in his father's presence. Gina's influence on his father grew. She was adept at weaving stories and controlling the narrative, exploiting small misunderstandings and fabricating incidents that painted the narrator as the troublesome, disrespectful stepson. But it didn't stop at mere manipulation. Her tactics became increasingly bold and sinister, reaching their peak when, out of nowhere, she accused him of assault. Continuing the story, after the false accusation, he felt completely powerless and devastated. His life was turned upside down as his own father, the one person he had trusted unconditionally, chose to believe the words of his stepmother, who had been exploiting the family's love and trust. The entire family sided with Gina, refusing to listen to his explanation, and he was forced to leave his father's house, feeling the painful sting of being rejected by his own family. In the years that followed, he lived with his biological mother, struggling to heal, but the emotional scars and the trauma of the false accusations left him unable to trust anyone. He faced difficulties in personal relationships, fearing that if he let others into his life, they would betray or hurt him just like his father and stepmother had. Every night, he wrestled with the memories, searching for answers as to why his father could so easily believe such baseless accusations. By the time he was 28, a new turning point emerged. His father unexpectedly called, expressing a desire to meet. His father had just experienced a major upheaval. He had discovered that Gina had been deceiving him for years, having an affair with his best friend. Realizing Gina's actions were purely self-serving, his father finally understood he had been manipulated. Now, with deep regret, he sought reconciliation with his son, realizing the harm his blind trust in Gina's false accusations had caused. Their meeting was filled with complex emotions. At first, He couldn't hold back his anger, confronting his father about abandoning him during his youth over baseless allegations. Yet, as his father sincerely apologized, he began to see that his father, too, had been a victim of Gina's manipulation. They talked throughout the night, sharing the pain both had endured. Slowly, he started to forgive his father, realizing that holding onto resentment would only keep him from fully healing. In the end, he decided to reconcile with his father, but he didn't return to the old house. Instead, he chose a life of independence, keeping a healthy distance from painful memories. The greatest lesson he learned was the importance of self-protection and not allowing others' toxicity to take control of his life. He continued on with a renewed sense of confidence, strength, and compassion for others who had endured similar pain. With the lessons of forgiveness and inner strength, he was finally able to live a more complete life, no longer haunted by the past. He chose to remember his father as a man who had made mistakes and suffered the consequences, but ultimately realized his wrongs and sought to make amends for what had been lost. As the years went by after being exiled from his father's home, he experienced a harsh period of transformation. The betrayal, the lies, and the isolation ate away at him, deeply affecting his sense of self-worth. In the beginning, every day felt like a battle. He struggled to understand why his father, once a figure of unwavering love, had been so quick to turn his back on him over baseless accusations. This wasn't just a single moment of heartbreak, it became a series of emotional upheavals, shaping who he would become as an adult. Moving in with his mother provided a temporary refuge. She was his source of comfort, a reminder that he was still loved and valued. Yet, the betrayal by his father cast a shadow over his life. Even though his mother tried to help him rebuild his confidence, he felt permanently scarred. At times, he blamed himself, wondering if he had somehow invited Gina's hatred or if there had been something he'd missed, a moment when he could have fixed things before they fell apart. As he grew older, he focused on self-improvement as a means of distraction. He poured his energy into his education, immersing himself in books and gaining new skills, hoping that excelling in other areas would make up for the emptiness left by his family's rejection. But as he entered the workforce, he found himself holding back in professional and personal relationships. The fear of being misunderstood or judged unfairly haunted him. He refrained from sharing personal details, choosing instead to remain detached and guarded. Romantic relationships, in particular, were difficult. How could he trust someone to get close when the people who should have loved him unconditionally had caused him the most pain? One day, while attending a support group on a friend's recommendation, he listened as others shared stories of family betrayals and childhood trauma. For the first time, he felt seen. He began to open up, recounting his own story and the emotional scars left by his father's abandonment and Gina's betrayal. The group became a lifeline, helping him understand that his pain wasn't unique and that healing could come with time and support. It was around this period that his father unexpectedly reached out to him. The shock of seeing his father's number flash on his phone after years of silence was enough to make him hesitate. After a moment of internal debate, he answered. His father's voice was filled with vulnerability and remorse, a tone he had never heard before. His father, shattered by the realization of Gina's deception, wanted a chance to explain himself. The meeting was a surreal experience. Sitting across from his father, he felt a storm of conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to lash out, to make his father feel the same hurt he had endured. Yet, as his father explained how Gina had manipulated and controlled him, a different feeling surfaced, a reluctant empathy. He could see now that his father, like him, had been a victim of Gina's cunning and deceit. She had preyed on his father's trust and vulnerability, using his love as a weapon to secure her own interests. In the following weeks, he found himself slowly reconnecting with his father. But this time, on his own terms, they would meet for coffee or take quiet walks together. And piece by piece, he allowed his father back into his life. Yet, this wasn't a complete restoration. There was a barrier that he couldn't ignore. The years of pain had created a divide that even the sincerest apologies couldn't fully bridge. Realizing he couldn't rely on anyone else for his happiness, he committed to building a life that was completely his own. He pursued his career with newfound ambition, creating goals that were independent of his past. In time, he found a circle of friends who became like family, people who were there not out of obligation but out of genuine affection and respect. Years passed, and with them came moments of quiet reflection. One day, he received news that Gina had finally left his father, abandoning him for another wealthy man. His father, once again alone, reached out for comfort, asking his son to visit. Standing in his father's house, now empty and devoid of Gina's toxic presence, he felt an odd sense of peace. It was as if the remnants of Gina's control had finally been lifted, leaving his father vulnerable and open to change. For the first time, they spoke not as father and son but as two men who had suffered, healed, and learned. His father acknowledged his failures, not just with a surface apology but with a deep understanding of the lifelong wounds his actions had caused. As he listened, he felt a surprising wave of compassion. The man before him was no longer the invincible figure he had idolized as a child but a flawed human being. Humbled by his mistakes, the journey taught him the value of resilience, of knowing his worth beyond anyone else's approval. He had learned to carve his own path, to build his own happiness, and to form meaningful connections with people who cherished him for who he was. The experience also taught him about forgiveness, not the kind that excuses the past but the kind that frees the soul from carrying the weight of resentment. In the end, he chose to forgive his father, not to erase the past, but to release himself from its grip. He no longer felt the need to dwell on what had been lost or wasted. Instead, he embraced the life he had built, the lessons he had learned, and the inner strength he had discovered. The final chapter of his story was one of peace and quiet pride. He had survived a trial few could understand, emerging stronger and wiser. And as he looked back, he realized that sometimes, the greatest victories are not those won over others but those won within oneself. The heartbreaking choice: a daughter's journey from rejection to resilience. I was only 17 when my entire world was turned upside down. A world already built on shaky foundations. The decision I made then, to keep my baby, was supposed to mark a new beginning. A step toward building a life I could call my own. Instead, it marked the end of everything I thought I knew, as the very people who had promised to be my family disowned me in one of my darkest moments. 20 years later, just as I had finally pieced my life back together, the past knocked on my door in an unexpected way, stirring memories I thought I'd buried. But to understand this twist, you need to know how my journey began. Losing my biological parents at a young age meant I was thrust into the foster system, bouncing from one home to another, never really knowing the security of a true family. That all changed when I was taken in by Lorraine and James, a couple who seemed, at first glance, like the parents I had been waiting for. They weren't perfect, but they offered stability, a home. At least, or so I thought. Behind their front door lay secrets and struggles. A world where kindness was overshadowed by strict rules and relentless expectations. James, a former military man with an unwavering gaze, set a regimen that made me feel more like a soldier than a daughter. Lorraine, though softer, struggled with her own demons, her presence often lost in the haze of wine and silence. Despite these flaws, I wanted to believe in them, to make this family my own. That belief kept me going, even through the hardest times. I told myself that if I just followed their rules, earned their approval, maybe one day, they would love me as their own. But the moment I made a choice that didn't align with their expectations, the choice to keep my child, they abandoned me. Now, 2 decades later, when I thought I had finally escaped their shadow, a single message on social media reopened wounds I had worked so hard to heal. Their biological son had found me, and with him came questions that only I could answer. As he sought to understand the truth about his parents and their choices, I found myself facing my own past all over again, this time with a strength I never knew I had. The story that follows isn't just about loss and survival. It's about the strength we find in the unlikeliest places, and the families we create when the ones we were born into fail us. In the years that followed my adoption by Lorraine and James, I did my best to adjust, hoping that their structured home would bring the stability I longed for. Yet, my teenage years soon revealed the true nature of life with them, a life dominated by James's strict rules and Lorraine's silent compliance. James's unyielding demands, rooted in his military background, transformed our home into a place where even minor mistakes had harsh consequences. Lorraine, while more compassionate, found solace in alcohol, often distant and absorbed in her own world. As I grew, So did James's expectations and the punishments for not meeting them. Grades became his measure of my worth, and any deviation from perfection was met with verbal and physical consequences. My friendships were restricted, my social interactions scrutinized, and every decision, from the clothes I wore to the people I associated with, was dictated by his demands. The occasional moments of kindness from Lorraine, a quiet moment to see my friends after school, a word of encouragement, became lifelines in a sea of isolation. Then, one unexpected friendship with a classmate named Harry changed everything. He was my escape, a source of warmth and support that contrasted sharply with the coldness of my home life. Our bond deepened into a relationship, a rare space where I felt seen and accepted. Harry showed me the kindness that James could not. And even though I knew my relationship would be a secret, we both valued our time together as something worth protecting. In the months leading up to graduation, Harry became my refuge, and I relied on him more than ever. Then, a life-changing discovery shattered my already fragile world. I was pregnant. The fear of telling James was paralyzing. I knew his reaction would be nothing short of explosive. Still, Harry stood by me, assuring me he would support any decision I made. With trepidation, I finally shared the news with Lorraine and James. Lorraine, stunned, initially seemed understanding, but James's reaction was predictably brutal. He raged, blaming my ungratefulness and irresponsibility for the situation, his words stinging like physical blows. Lorraine, however, proposed something that caught me off guard. She suggested I carry the pregnancy to term and then give the baby to her and James to raise as their own. They saw my unborn child as a second chance to be the family they had failed to be for me. The thought of handing over my child to them was unfathomable. How could I allow my baby to grow up in the same oppressive environment, subject to the same rules and expectations that had haunted me? I firmly told them no, explaining that I could not, in good conscience, give up my child to such a life. Lorraine pleaded, but when I held my ground, James erupted in fury. He declared that I was no longer welcome in their home, leaving me with no choice but to leave. Harry's family took me in, supporting me through the following months. Their kindness and acceptance were a stark contrast to the rejection I had experienced. After making the difficult choice to terminate the pregnancy, Harry and his parents continued to stand by me as I rebuilt my life. With their encouragement, I went on to college, determined to create a future free from the shadow of my adoptive family. Over the next 2 decades, I found peace and stability. Harry and I eventually married, and his family became mine in every sense of the word. We built a life filled with love and respect, a life I had once only dreamed of. Then, out of the blue, I received a message from a man named Matt. As I read his words, my heart raced. He was Lorraine and James's biological son, reaching out to learn about the family he had never truly known. We began a tentative correspondence, and I soon found myself sharing pieces of my past that I had long buried. He listened with understanding, seeking to know the truth about his parents. The revelation of their abandonment shocked him, and he promised to confront them. The confrontation sparked tension between Matt and his parents, who denied everything, accusing me of manipulation. Despite their denials, Matt believed me, and in an act of compassion, he invited me to be part of his life, offering a familial bond that neither of us had expected. Over the months that followed, Matt and I formed a sibling-like connection, one based on honesty and mutual understanding. His acceptance allowed me to close a chapter of my life with a sense of peace. As I reflected on the years of struggle, I realized that family is not always defined by blood or circumstance, but by the people who support and uplift us. In the end, the hardships I endured with Lorraine and James taught me invaluable lessons in resilience and forgiveness. I had survived, built a life of love, and found family in those who truly cared for me. Though the scars of the past remained, I knew that they no longer defined me. I was free, and for the first time, I felt at peace.